I read the story of McGovern's daughter's death from alcoholism in 1996. At that time, there were about 20 million alcoholic addicts in our country, and there were about 1.5 million people in recovery. By 2014, when the beautiful film Anonymous People was published, there were still about 20 million alcoholic addicts in our country. But there were, at that time, about 23.5 million people in long-term recovery. Unless you work in the field of recovery, you don't know this. In fact, you may think that addiction is getting worse and worse. Only when I began working in the field of addiction in 1999 did I wake up to the incredible miracles taking place in the country around recovery. You won't see this in the news, however. Elton John produced his own film about his 30 years in recovery. And if you are like me on many recovery sites, you saw that Anthony Hopkins just celebrated 45 years of recovery. People with addiction to drugs and alcohol are, at the most in the United States, only 10% of the population, which means that we are a minority. And like all minorities, the majority doesn't understand us. In fact, I've found in my many years of recovery, including 56 years recovery from bulimia, 43 years recovery from cigarettes, and 40 years recovery from being a binge alcoholic, that people who know nothing about addiction act like they know everything about addiction, what it means to be an addict, what an addict should do to stop. If you really want to learn about addiction, go to any recovery meeting and just listen. Get into the world of addiction and learn from them. When my younger twin son was 17, I asked him why he drank. He said, "School is so stressful and I feel like I don't really fit in." Being an alcoholic in long-term recovery, I remembered those days in my own addiction. Fortunately, he did get into treatment, at which time he discovered that nearly all teenagers have those concerns, and they find other ways to deal with them rather than drinking. Currently, we know a lot about the disease of addiction and how to treat it successfully. It is a brain disorder. Our addictive brains don't operate like the brains of so-called normies. A couple of the things I remind myself on a daily basis to deal with my addicted brain include: an alcoholic addict alone is in a bad neighborhood. I have a daily reprieve from the crazies of my addicted brain. By now you may be thinking, like many of my normie friends, "Oh, you are so much more than an alcoholic. You're a good person." I know that. I also know that until I die, my brain has huge freeways of addictive behaviors. In fact, when an addict alcoholic first begins recovery, that's all that is available, those addiction freeways. Over time, we learn to take the exit off the addiction freeways, and we build little paths, goat paths really, at the beginning of recovery. As one woman, a former client, said, at the beginning and for about a year into my recovery, whatever my brain wanted to do, I did the exact opposite. By now, I hope you want to know how to support addict alcoholics in getting into treatment. Listen to us as we share our stories of trauma, of addiction, of why we think we must use or behave addictively, which you can see isn't really helping us at all. On some level, we know that, but it isn't how it occurs to us in our addictions. For example, when I was a young mother and the doctors at Princeton Hospital would give me all the smokers to rehabilitate as a physical therapist, they would ask me, "Seeing what cigarette smoking does to people, is that enough to have you stop smoking?" I would reply, "No, it made me too anxious. I had to have a cigarette." Pray that we have consequences that may force us into treatment: arrests, prison, being banned from our families, medical illnesses, etc. Pray for a long treatment period, since the key to recovery is the length of the treatment over time. Pilots have the best recovery rate in America. 97% of pilots who go into treatment stay in recovery. Their treatment time is 2.5 years. And then, of course, they live in a tight structure to keep them from using. They're tested all the time. Most addicts have underlying trauma, so encourage us to seek healing for our PTSD.